In the fall of 2019, the suburban town of Oak Ridge seemed to have a picture-perfect family in the Carters. Emily and Daniel, married for over a decade, had built what many would call a dream life. Their cozy home, complete with a white picket fence, 2 lively kids, Lily and Max, and a golden retriever named Charlie, was the epitome of suburban bliss. But behind closed doors, not everything was as idyllic as it seemed. Emily, a freelance graphic designer, worked tirelessly from her home office while managing the chaos of school schedules and extracurricular activities. Creative and detail-oriented, she prided herself on being the steady force in her family's life. Daniel, her husband, was a corporate manager at a tech firm. He was the kind of man people gravitated toward, charming, witty, and seemingly devoted. But in recent months, Emily had started to notice a change. Their date nights had dwindled to nothing. Daniel's long hours at the office or sudden networking events seemed to take precedence over family time. Conversations became transactional, school drop-offs, grocery lists, and mundane logistics. Emily told herself it was just the ebb and flow of married life, but the nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right lingered. One October morning, Emily rose early, as she always did, to prepare breakfast. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air as she scrambled eggs and flipped pancakes. Lily and Max raced down the stairs, their backpacks half-zipped and their energy as chaotic as ever. Daniel followed soon after, his face buried in his phone. "Morning, Dad," Lily chirped, plopping into her chair. Max, already halfway through a pancake, mumbled something unintelligible. "Morning, kids," Daniel replied absently, his thumbs flying across the screen. Emily placed a plate in front of him, frowning slightly. "Who are you texting this early?" she asked, keeping her tone casual. "Just work stuff," Daniel said without looking up. "Big meeting today." Emily nodded, though the explanation didn't entirely sit right with her. Daniel's phone had been buzzing constantly over the past few weeks, and he was always quick to turn it face down or step out of the room to take a call. The kids finished breakfast in record time, and Emily ushered them out the door for school. When she returned, the house felt eerily quiet. Daniel had already left for work, leaving behind a steaming coffee mug and his cologne lingering in the air. As Emily tidied up, she noticed his laptop bag still sitting by the front door. It was unlike him to forget it, considering how often he brought work home. She hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the bag and decided to swing by his office on her way to run errands. The drive to Daniel's office was uneventful, but when Emily arrived, she felt a strange mix of curiosity and dread. She knew Daniel's work environment well. After all, she'd attended more than a few holiday parties and team-building events. But today, something felt different. As she walked into the sleek glass building, she caught sight of Daniel through the large office windows. He wasn't at his desk, engrossed in spreadsheets or presentations like usual. Instead, he was in the corner lounge, leaning in close to a woman Emily didn't recognize. The woman was striking, tall, impeccably dressed, and laughing at something Daniel had said. Emily froze, her grip tightening on the laptop bag. She told herself it was innocent, probably just a coworker. But the way Daniel's hand rested on the back of the woman's chair made her stomach twist. Before she could think of what to do next, Daniel turned and saw her standing there. His face registered surprise, then something Emily couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe? He walked over quickly, a forced smile on his face. "Emily, what are you doing here?" he asked, his tone a little too casual. "You forgot your bag," she said, handing it to him. Her voice felt steadier than she expected. "Thanks," he said, glancing back toward the lounge. "I was just catching up with a colleague." Emily nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Colleague?" "Yeah, Claire. She's new on the team," Daniel explained, his tone overly breezy. "I was just showing her around." Emily didn't press further, but the unease followed her all the way home. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, she noticed how distracted Daniel seemed, how his phone buzzed incessantly but remained untouched. The kids didn't notice, too busy bickering about who got the last breadstick, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from her. The days that followed were more of the same. Daniel's late nights grew more frequent, and his explanations felt increasingly hollow. Emily found herself replaying the moment at his office over and over, dissecting every detail. Who was Claire, really? Was it possible Daniel was just being friendly? Or was there something more? One night, unable to sleep, Emily sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old photos of her and Daniel. Their wedding day, vacations, birthdays, each image a reminder of the life they had built together. She wanted to believe that they were just going through a rough patch, that Daniel's distance was temporary. But deep down, she knew better. The small cracks in their relationship were starting to feel like fissures. And so, Emily decided it was time to trust her instincts. Something wasn't right, and she needed to know the truth. A week after the office visit, Emily's unease only grew stronger. Daniel's late nights became routine, and the warmth he once carried into their home had turned into a cold distance. It wasn't just her imagination. She could feel it in the way he avoided her gaze, the clipped responses to her questions, and how often his phone seemed glued to his hand. One Friday evening, while the kids were at a sleepover, Emily decided to confront him. She waited until he came home. The door creaking open at 10:30 p.m. Daniel stepped inside, loosening his tie and looking surprised to see her sitting on the couch, waiting. "You're up late," he said, setting his briefcase down. "We need to talk," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. Daniel hesitated, his hand frozen mid-motion as he pulled off his shoes. "Okay, about what?" "About us. About how distant you've been. About why you've been coming home so late." He sighed and sank into the chair opposite her. "Emily, it's just work. We've got a huge project right now, and I've been putting in extra hours to make sure everything goes smoothly." "Work?" she repeated. "Like the time you were with Claire in the office lounge?" Daniel stiffened, the casual mask slipping for a brief moment. "I told you she's just a colleague. You're reading too much into this." "Am I?" Emily leaned forward. "Because it feels like I'm living with a stranger. You don't talk to me anymore, Daniel. You don't spend time with the kids like you used to. I want to believe you, but you're not giving me much to hold on to." For a moment, Daniel looked genuinely conflicted. But then he stood, brushing off the conversation like crumbs from a table. "You're overthinking this, Emily. Things are just stressful right now. Let's talk about it when the project is done." And with that, he left the room, leaving Emily sitting alone with her unanswered questions. Over the next few days, Emily decided to trust her gut. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but she also couldn't ignore the growing pile of inconsistencies. She started paying closer attention to Daniel's behavior. His late-night calls, the vague explanations, and the way he always seemed to have a reason to stay out just a little longer. One evening, as Daniel showered, Emily's curiosity got the better of her. His phone sat on the nightstand, screen locked but buzzing with notifications. She hesitated, her hands trembling. She didn't want to be that person, snooping through her husband's phone. But the unease gnawed at her. With a deep breath, she picked it up. The lock screen showed several messages from someone named Claire. Emily's heart sank. The preview of the latest text read, "Tonight was amazing. Can't wait for next time." Emily's world seemed to tilt on its axis. She quickly put the phone back where she found it and retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Her mind raced. Was it an innocent misunderstanding, or had her worst fears been confirmed? The image of Daniel leaning in close to Claire in the lounge replayed in her mind, this time with a sharper edge. The next morning, Emily called her best friend, Sarah. Sarah had been her confidant since college, the one person she could turn to when life felt overwhelming. "I think Daniel is cheating on me," Emily blurted out as soon as Sarah picked up. There was a pause on the other end. "Emily, are you sure? That's a big accusation." "I saw messages from Claire on his phone," Emily explained, pacing the kitchen. "They weren't work-related, Sarah. And it's not just that, he's been distant, secretive. I feel like I don't even know him anymore." Sarah sighed. "Okay, first, take a deep breath. If he is cheating, you need proof before you do anything drastic. You don't want to confront him without knowing the full story. Emily nodded, though Sarah couldn't see her. You're right. But how do I get proof? Hire a private investigator, Sarah suggested. They're discreet and can give you the evidence you need, one way or another. The idea felt extreme, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was right. If she was going to confront Daniel, she needed irrefutable proof. Later that week, Emily met with a private investigator named Mark. He was professional, straightforward, and understanding of her situation. I'll follow him, document his movements, and keep you updated, Mark said, sliding his business card across the table. If there's anything suspicious, you'll know. Emily left the meeting feeling a mix of relief and dread. She didn't want her suspicions to be true, but she also couldn't ignore the signs any longer. The next 2 weeks felt like an eternity. Daniel's behavior remained the same. Late nights, secretive calls, and that ever-present distance. Emily tried to act normal around him and the kids, but the weight of her suspicions bore down on her. Finally, one evening, Mark called. Emily, I've got something you need to see. Can we meet? Her stomach churned as she agreed to meet him the next morning. The following day, in a small cafe, Mark handed her a folder filled with photos and documents. Each image felt like a dagger to the heart. Daniel and Claire at a romantic dinner, walking hand in hand into a hotel, laughing together in ways Emily hadn't seen him laugh in years. Emily's hands trembled as she closed the folder. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, Emily, Mark said, his tone kind. Take your time to process this. If you need anything else, let me know. That night, Emily sat alone in her office, staring at the folder on her desk. The truth was undeniable now, and she couldn't ignore it any longer. She had to confront Daniel, but the thought terrified her. What would this mean for their marriage, for their family? The sound of the garage door opening snapped her out of her thoughts. Daniel was home. It was time to face the truth. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories like this one. Your support helps us bring you the most gripping tales of betrayal, resilience, and truth. Stay tuned for the next chapter of Emily's journey. Emily sat in the living room, her hands clenched around the edges of the folder Mark had given her. The room was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls as the only light came from the table lamp beside her. She had replayed this moment in her head countless times, trying to anticipate how Daniel would react when confronted. But now that the moment had arrived, every carefully rehearsed word seemed to slip away. The sound of the garage door shutting snapped her out of her thoughts. Daniel stepped into the house, loosening his tie and shrugging off his jacket. He froze when he saw Emily sitting there, her expression unreadable. You're up late again, he said, trying to sound casual. Is everything okay? No, Daniel, Emily said, her voice steady but cold. Everything is not okay. Sit down. Daniel hesitated, his eyes flicking to the folder on the coffee table. What's this about? Sit, Emily repeated, her tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Daniel lowered himself onto the couch across from her. His posture was stiff, his hands resting on his knees. Emily slid the folder toward him. What's this? He asked again, though his voice wavered slightly. Open it, she said simply. Daniel's hand trembled as he picked up the folder and flipped it open. His face drained of color as he took in the photos of him and Claire, the timestamps, and the receipts. For a moment, he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the damning evidence. Emily, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't, she cut him off. Don't insult me by trying to deny it. I've seen enough. I know everything. Daniel's jaw tightened, and he set the folder down. He paused, searching for the right words. It's not what it looks like. Emily laughed, the sound bitter and hollow. Not what it looks like. So you're telling me those photos are fake? That those receipts don't exist? That the woman you've been sneaking around with isn't Claire? It was a mistake, Daniel said quickly. It didn't mean anything. I was stressed and Stop, Emily snapped, her voice rising. Don't you dare try to justify this by blaming your stress. You didn't trip and accidentally fall into an affair, Daniel. You made a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice to betray me and destroy our family. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his expression one of desperation. I love you, Emily. I never meant to hurt you. Love. Emily stood, her anger boiling over. You call this love? Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To our marriage? To our kids? You've been lying to my face for months. Daniel. Months. And now you're trying to tell me it didn't mean anything. I messed up, Daniel admitted, his voice breaking. I know I did, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, Emily. We can get through this. Emily stared at him, her chest heaving. The man sitting before her wasn't the man she had married. The man she had built a life with was gone, replaced by someone she no longer recognized. How do you expect me to trust you again? She asked, her voice quieter now but no less filled with pain. How do you expect me to believe anything you say after this? Daniel looked away, unable to meet her eyes. The silence between them was deafening. Over the next few days, the house became a battleground of tense conversations and silent standoffs. Emily couldn't bring herself to tell the kids. Not yet. They were too young to understand, and she didn't want to shatter their world before she figured out her next steps. Daniel, to his credit, tried to make amends. He canceled late-night work meetings, deleted Claire's contact information in front of Emily, and even suggested couples therapy. But every gesture felt hollow, like putting a bandage on a wound that required stitches. One evening, Emily found herself scrolling through old photos on her phone. There was one from their anniversary trip to Italy, a selfie of the two of them standing in front of the Colosseum, their smiles wide and genuine. She remembered how happy they had been then, how certain she was that they were unshakable. Now, that happiness felt like a distant memory, tainted by the weight of Daniel's betrayal. A week later, Emily received a message from Mark. He had more information, this time, about Claire. Hesitant but curious, Emily agreed to meet him again. This might be hard to hear, Mark said, sliding another folder across the table. But I think you deserve to know. Inside the folder were records detailing Claire's history. A string of affairs with married men, a reputation for stirring up trouble in the workplace, and even a restraining order filed by a former partner's wife. Emily's stomach churned as she read through the documents. She's not just a mistake, Emily said, her voice shaking. She's a predator. Mark nodded. It's clear she has a pattern. But what you do with this information is up to you. Emily returned home, her mind racing. Daniel was in the backyard, tossing a ball with Charlie, his expression lighter than it had been in weeks. For a moment, Emily hesitated. Should she confront him with this new information, or would it only add fuel to the fire? Daniel, she called, stepping onto the porch. He turned, his smile fading as he saw the look on her face. What is it? We need to talk, she said, holding up the folder. The confrontation that followed was explosive. Emily laid everything out, the photos, the receipts, and now the evidence of Claire's manipulative behavior. Daniel looked genuinely shocked, but whether it was because of Claire's actions or because he had been caught in yet another lie, Emily couldn't tell. I didn't know, Daniel said, his voice pleading. I swear, I didn't know she was like this. You didn't care, Emily shot back. You didn't care about her past or about me or about our kids. All you cared about was whatever thrill you were getting from sneaking around with her. Daniel fell silent, his shoulders slumping in defeat. What do you want me to do? I want you to leave, Emily said firmly. At least for now. I need time to figure out what's next, and I can't do that with you here. Daniel opened his mouth to argue but then seemed to think better of it. He nodded slowly. If that's what you need. It is, Emily said, her voice unwavering. And if you really love me, you'll respect that. The days that followed were some of the hardest Emily had ever faced. Telling the kids was gut-wrenching. Lily cried for hours, while Max retreated into silence, refusing to speak to either parent. Emily felt like she had failed them, but she knew that staying in a broken marriage would only hurt them more in the long run. Slowly, she began to rebuild her life. She threw herself into her work, finding solace in the creative projects that had once brought her joy. She leaned on Sarah for support, grateful for her friend's unwavering presence. As for Daniel, he kept his distance, though he continued to check in about the kids. He attended therapy on his own and sent Emily long, heartfelt messages apologizing for everything he had done. But Emily wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet, and maybe not ever. The evening was unusually quiet. Emily sat in the kitchen, staring at her untouched cup of tea, her mind swirling with thoughts of what had happened over the past month. Daniel had moved out, leaving a gaping void in their home. The kids had adjusted, or at least they were trying to, but Emily could tell the fractures were still there. Lily clung to her at bedtime, needing extra reassurance, while Max spent more time in his room, headphones on, retreating into his own world. The weight of holding everything together felt unbearable at times. That night, a knock at the door startled her. Emily wasn't expecting anyone, and the kids were already asleep. She peeked through the window and saw Claire standing on the porch, her silhouette lit by the porch light. Emily's heart stopped. What was she doing here? Taking a deep breath, Emily opened the door, keeping her expression neutral. "What are you doing here?" Claire's smile was thin, calculated. "We need to talk." Emily stepped outside, closing the door behind her. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here." "I'm not here to fight," Claire said, her tone calm but laced with something Emily couldn't quite place. "I just thought you should know the full story." "The full story?" Emily folded her arms. "Like the part where you knowingly got involved with a married man and helped destroy a family?" Claire's expression hardened. "You think Daniel didn't come to me willingly? You think I forced him into anything?" "He's not the saint you seem to believe he is, Emily." "I don't think he's a saint," Emily shot back. "But at least he's trying to fix what he broke." "What's your excuse?" Claire laughed. A sharp, cold sound. "Fix it? Is that what you think he's doing? He's only playing the repentant husband because he got caught. If he really wanted to fix things, he wouldn't have called me last week." The words hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, didn't he tell you?" Claire's smile widened, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Daniel reached out, said he missed me, that he wasn't sure if things with you were worth salvaging." Emily's chest tightened. Was Claire lying? Or was there some truth to her claim? "Why should I believe anything you say?" Claire shrugged. "Believe what you want, but you should ask yourself, can you ever really trust him again?" That night, Emily confronted Daniel over the phone. She didn't mention Claire's visit but asked point-blank if he had been in contact with her. Daniel's silence was answer enough. "You told me you wanted to fix this," Emily said, her voice trembling with anger. "But you're still talking to her? Do you even understand what you've done to this family?" "It was a mistake," Daniel said, his voice filled with regret. "I was confused, Emily." Confused," Emily interrupted. "You've been saying that a lot lately, but you know what's not confusing? Deciding whether or not to talk to the woman who helped you betray your wife." "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "I swear, I'll cut her off completely. Just don't give up on us." "I already did," Emily said quietly. "The moment you chose her over me." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. Emily focused on her kids, her work, and her own healing, but Daniel's betrayal lingered in the back of her mind like a shadow she couldn't shake. The final straw came when she discovered a hidden credit card statement detailing a weekend getaway Daniel had taken with Claire months earlier, while Emily had been home with a sick child. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the confirmation she needed to make her decision. Emily's lawyer was kind and understanding as they discussed the terms of the divorce. She wanted to protect her children, ensure their stability, and move forward with as much dignity as she could muster. When she told Daniel, his reaction was predictable. Pleading, bargaining, promises to change. But Emily had heard it all before. This time, there was no going back. The day of the final confrontation came unexpectedly. Emily was at a parent-teacher meeting when her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "You need to come home. Now." Emily's heart raced as she drove back to the house. When she arrived, she saw Daniel's car in the driveway, and Claire's parked right behind it. Bursting through the door, Emily found them in the living room, their voices raised in argument. The kids were nowhere in sight. Thank God. What the hell is going on? Emily demanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. Both Daniel and Claire turned to face her, their expressions a mix of surprise and guilt. Daniel started to speak, but Emily held up a hand. I don't want to hear it, she said, her voice shaking. You have no right to be here, either of you. Get out. Claire smirked, her usual composure returning. I'm just here to remind Daniel what he's giving up. Emily stepped closer, her anger boiling over. What he's giving up? You mean the lies, the deceit, the complete lack of integrity? You're welcome to it, Claire. But not in my house. Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with regret. Emily, I didn't ask her to come. I swear. I don't care, Emily said, her voice firm. I'm done with both of you. Claire shrugged, brushing past Emily on her way out. Good luck, Daniel. Looks like you'll need it. When the door closed behind her, Emily turned to Daniel. You need to leave too. Now. Daniel hesitated but eventually nodded. I'm sorry, Emily, for everything. Sorry doesn't fix this, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. It never could. As Daniel left, Emily felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of his betrayal no longer felt suffocating. For the first time in months, she could breathe. She sat down on the couch, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't the ending she had wanted for her family, but it was the one they needed. Sometimes, letting go was the only way to move forward. The days after Claire's dramatic intrusion at Emily's home were anything but quiet. Emily had hoped for calm, time to process, to breathe, but life had other plans. Her lawyer called with updates about the divorce proceedings. The school principal requested a meeting about Max's declining grades, and Lily was beginning to act out in subtle but noticeable ways. The storm that had been brewing for months was finally reaching its peak. Emily was in the middle of folding laundry one afternoon when she received a call from Sarah. Her friend's voice was urgent. You won't believe this, Sarah said, barely able to contain her frustration. Claire's posting about you and Daniel on social media. What? Emily froze, her hands clutching a pair of socks. What is she saying? She's painting herself as the victim, Sarah explained, talking about how you're trying to ruin her life and calling you the bitter ex-wife. She even posted pictures of her and Daniel. Emily's heart sank. It wasn't enough that Claire had destroyed her marriage. Now she was trying to destroy her reputation too. Send me the screenshots, Emily said, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. Later that evening, Emily sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the screenshots Sarah had sent. Each post was more infuriating than the last. Claire had spun a narrative in which she was the innocent party, unfairly vilified by a scorned woman. The comments on her posts were filled with supportive messages from people who didn't know the truth, and it made Emily's blood boil. She debated whether to respond, but Sarah was quick to advise against it. Don't stoop to her level, Sarah said over the phone. People like Claire thrive on drama. The best thing you can do is rise above it. Emily knew Sarah was right, but that didn't make it any easier. She felt powerless, watching as Claire continued to weave her web of lies. Meanwhile, Daniel seemed to be grappling with his own guilt. He called Emily one evening, his voice hesitant. I heard about Claire's posts, he said. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. You think? Emily's sarcasm was biting. What exactly do you want from me, Daniel? Sympathy? Forgiveness? Because I'm fresh out. I just want to help, Daniel said, sounding defeated. I'll talk to Claire. Tell her to take the posts down. Emily laughed bitterly. Good luck with that. You've seen what kind of person she is. Do you really think she'll listen to you? I have to try, Daniel said quietly. I owe you that much. You owe me a lot more than that, Emily replied before hanging up. The next day, Daniel followed through on his promise, or tried to. Claire, predictably, refused to take down the posts. Instead, she doubled down, accusing Daniel of abandoning her and blaming Emily for turning him against her. It was a train wreck Emily couldn't look away from, though every update left her feeling more frustrated and drained. Amid all this chaos, Emily's focus remained on her kids. Max, who had always been the quieter of the two, was struggling the most. His grades had slipped, and his teachers reported that he was often distracted in class. When Emily tried to talk to him about it, he brushed her off with a mumbled, "I'm fine." One evening, she found him sitting on the floor of his room, staring blankly at his laptop. "Max," she said gently, sitting down beside him. "Talk to me. What's going on?" "I don't know," he said after a long pause. "Everything just feels wrong." Emily's heart ached for him. "I know it's hard right now," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But we're going to get through this. I promise." "How?" Max asked, his voice cracking. "How are we supposed to get through this when everything's falling apart?" Emily didn't have an answer. All she could do was hold him as he finally let his tears fall. The turning point came a week later, during a meeting with her lawyer. Emily had gone in expecting to discuss custody arrangements, but instead, her lawyer had surprising news. "Daniel's agreed to give you full custody," the lawyer said, her tone cautious. "He says he wants what's best for the kids." Emily blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "What's the catch?" "There isn't one," the lawyer said. "At least not that I can see. He seems genuine." Genuine. The word felt foreign when associated with Daniel, but Emily couldn't deny the relief that washed over her. Maybe, just maybe, this was his way of finally putting their kids first. That evening, Emily sat down with Max and Lily to talk about the changes ahead. She explained that she would have full custody and that while their father would still be a part of their lives, he wouldn't be living with them. "Does that mean we won't have to see Claire anymore?" Lily asked, her small voice hopeful. Emily smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart. You won't have to see Claire." Max, however, remained quiet. After the conversation ended, he retreated to his room, leaving Emily to wonder if he would ever fully heal from the damage Daniel had caused. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. Emily was out running errands when she received a frantic call from Sarah. "Claire's at your house," Sarah said. "She's causing a scene." Emily's stomach dropped. "I'm on my way." When she arrived home, she found Claire on the front lawn, shouting at Daniel, who had apparently come to drop off some of the kids' belongings. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, watching the spectacle unfold. "Claire, what are you doing here?" Emily demanded as she stepped out of her car. "This is all your fault," Claire screamed, turning her fury on Emily. "You ruined everything." Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "Claire, you need to leave. Now." "I'm not going anywhere," Claire shouted. "Not until you admit that you've been lying about me." "I don't owe you anything," Emily said, her voice firm. "You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences. But you're not doing it here." Daniel stepped forward, his expression filled with regret. "Claire, go. You're only making things worse." Claire glared at him, her eyes filled with betrayal. "You're just going to let her win?" "This isn't about winning," Daniel said quietly. "It's about doing what's right." For a moment, Claire seemed on the verge of another outburst, but then she turned and stormed off, leaving behind an eerie silence. Emily looked at Daniel, her exhaustion evident. "Is this what our lives have come to? Public meltdowns and neighbor gossip?" Daniel sighed. "I'm sorry, Emily, for everything." "Sorry doesn't fix this," Emily said, echoing her own words from weeks earlier. "But I hope, for the kids' sake, you can figure out how to be a better father." Daniel nodded, his eyes downcast. "I'm trying." Later that night, Emily sat on the porch, staring up at the stars. The chaos of the day had settled, leaving her with a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, she felt like she was finally regaining control of her life. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time, she felt like she could see a way forward. After Claire's dramatic exit from Emily's front yard, you'd think things might simmer down for a while, right? Wrong. The events of that chaotic day had barely scratched the surface of the emotional storm brewing beneath the surface. Emily woke up the next morning feeling a mix of exhaustion and resolve. She knew she needed to shield her kids from any further drama. But as the days passed, the tension in the house grew heavier. Max and Lily were still processing everything, each in their own way. While Lily seemed to take comfort in the new stability Emily was trying to create, Max had grown increasingly withdrawn. One evening, Emily found Max sitting alone in the garage, his old basketball in his hands. He wasn't shooting hoops like he used to. Instead, he just sat there, staring at the worn leather as if it held the answers to life's biggest questions. "Hey," Emily said softly as she approached him. "Mind if I join you?" Max shrugged but didn't look up. Emily sat down on the cold cement floor, crossing her legs. "I know this hasn't been easy for you. It hasn't been easy for me either." "Then why does it feel like everyone's pretending?" Max finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's heart broke a little more. "Pretending? Like it's all fine now that Dad's not around. But it's not fine. It's never going to be fine." Emily reached out and placed a hand on Max's shoulder. "You're right. It's not fine. And it's okay to feel that way. What happened to our family? It's not something we just get over. But we can work through it together." Max finally met her gaze, his eyes filled with unshed tears. "I miss how things used to be." "I do too," Emily admitted. "But sometimes, things fall apart so that something better can take their place." "Like what?" Max asked skeptically. Emily thought for a moment. "Like us finding out how strong we can be, even when it feels like the world is against us." Max didn't respond, but he leaned into her side, resting his head on her shoulder. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Meanwhile, Daniel was trying, and failing, to clean up the mess he had created. He had cut ties with Claire after her public meltdown, but her presence lingered like a shadow over his every move. At work, his colleagues whispered behind his back. At the gym, old friends avoided eye contact. It was as if Claire's chaos had infected every corner of his life. One afternoon, Daniel showed up at Emily's house unannounced. He looked disheveled, his usual polished demeanor replaced by a man who seemed on the verge of collapse. "Emily, can we talk?" he asked, his voice strained. Emily hesitated. She wanted nothing more than to slam the door in his face, but the pleading look in his eyes stopped her. She stepped aside, allowing him in. I don't know what to do anymore," Daniel admitted as he sank onto the couch. "I've lost everything. My marriage, my reputation, my kids." Emily folded her arms, keeping her distance. "You didn't lose those things, Daniel. You gave them up. And for what? A fling with someone who didn't even respect you enough to keep her drama out of our lives." Daniel winced at her words but didn't argue. "I know I messed up. I know I can't undo what I've done. But I need to find a way to make things right." Emily sighed, the weight of his words pressing on her. "Making things right doesn't mean you get to come back into our lives and pretend like nothing happened. It means taking responsibility for your actions and being there for Max and Lily, even if it's from a distance." "I'm trying," Daniel said, his voice cracking. "I just don't know how." "Start by showing up," Emily said firmly. "Not for me, not for you, but for them." The real breaking point came when Claire, unable to stay out of the spotlight, decided to escalate her tactics. Emily received an anonymous email containing photos of Daniel and Claire together, some from their early days of the affair and others from more recent rendezvous. The message was clear. Claire wanted to remind Emily of everything she had lost. Emily's first instinct was to delete the email and move on, but as she stared at the images, something inside her shifted. She was tired of being a victim, tired of letting Claire control the narrative. It was time to take back her power. She forwarded the email to her lawyer with a simple note. "Let's use this." Her lawyer called her within the hour. "This is exactly what we need," she said. "With these photos, we can solidify your case for full custody and ensure Daniel has limited visitation rights. Claire's involvement makes it clear that their relationship was detrimental to the kids' well-being." For the first time in months, Emily felt a glimmer of hope. The battle wasn't over, but she finally had a weapon of her own. In the courtroom, Emily sat across from Daniel, their lawyers presenting their respective cases. The tension was palpable as the photos of Daniel and Claire were displayed on the screen. Daniel looked down, shame written all over his face, while Emily held her head high, refusing to let the moment break her. The judge took everything into consideration: Daniel's infidelity, Claire's disruptive behavior, and Emily's unwavering dedication to her children. In the end, the ruling was clear. Emily would retain full custody, with Daniel granted supervised visitation until he could prove his stability. As the gavel came down, Emily felt a sense of closure. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was the start of a new chapter, one where she could finally begin to heal and rebuild her life. That evening, Emily sat on the porch with Max and Lily, the three of them wrapped in a blanket as they watched the sunset. The weight of the past months seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. "Do you think things will ever be normal again?" Lily asked, her voice small. Emily smiled and pulled her closer. "Maybe not normal, but I think they'll be better." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily allowed herself to hope. For her kids, for herself, and for the future they were slowly piecing back together. The courtroom victory was just the beginning of the storm's crescendo. With custody secured, Emily thought she'd earned some respite. But Claire wasn't done. Her jealousy and bitterness had become all-consuming, and she saw Emily's win as a personal defeat. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. Claire wanted revenge. Emily received the first anonymous note a week after the hearing. It was slipped under her front door in the dead of night. The message was scrawled in jagged, angry letters: "You think you've won, but this isn't over." She didn't tell Max or Lily about the note, not wanting to alarm them. Instead, she called her lawyer the next morning. "It's probably just Claire trying to rattle you," her lawyer said. "But keep a record of everything. If it escalates, we'll involve the authorities." Emily tried to brush it off, but she couldn't shake the sense of being watched. Every time she left the house, she found herself glancing over her shoulder. At work, she caught herself looking out the window, scanning the parking lot for unfamiliar cars. It was exhausting, living with that constant edge of fear. Meanwhile, Daniel was struggling to adapt to his new reality. Supervised visitation with Max and Lily was a far cry from the weekends at the park and movie nights he used to enjoy. The kids were distant, particularly Max, whose resentment toward his father simmered just beneath the surface. During one of the sessions, Max finally let his anger boil over. They were sitting in the sterile confines of the visitation center, a social worker quietly observing from the corner of the room. "Why do we even have to do this?" Max snapped. "It's not like you care." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Of course I care, Max. You're my son." Max crossed his arms, his glare icy. "Then why did you ruin everything? Why did you cheat on Mom? Why did you choose her over us?" Daniel's throat tightened. He had no good answers, just the same hollow excuses he'd been telling himself for months. "I made a mistake," he said finally. "I know I hurt you and your sister, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix things." Max stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't fix it. You broke us, and there's no putting it back together." Before Daniel could respond, Max stormed out of the room, leaving him sitting there, shattered. The social worker watched him silently, her face unreadable. As if the strain of her new reality wasn't enough, Emily's life took another dramatic turn when a package arrived on her doorstep. It was a plain cardboard box with no return address. Inside, she found a flash drive and a handwritten note. "Watch this. Know the truth." Heart pounding, Emily plugged the flash drive into her laptop. The video that played was grainy but clear enough to see Claire, sitting in what appeared to be a hotel room. She was laughing, holding up a glass of wine as she spoke to someone off camera. "It was so easy," Claire said, her words slurred slightly. Daniel was desperate for attention, and Emily, oh poor Emily, she never saw it coming. "He fell right into my lap. I barely had to try." The camera panned slightly, revealing the person Claire was speaking to. Another man Emily didn't recognize. He chuckled and replied, "Guess the little family man wasn't so perfect after all." "Huh? Not even close," Claire said with a smirk. "And now I have him wrapped around my finger. He'll never go back to her, not after what I've got on him." Emily sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. Claire had manipulated Daniel from the start, using his vulnerabilities against him. And now, it seemed, she was determined to destroy what little remained of Emily's peace. Emily knew she couldn't keep this new information to herself. She contacted her lawyer immediately and forwarded the video. The lawyer's response was swift. "This changes everything. If Claire is actively targeting you, we need to act." The following days were a whirlwind of police reports, restraining order filings, and increased security measures around Emily's home. She hated that her life had come to this, but she was determined not to let Claire win. Claire, of course, wasn't deterred. She began showing up at Emily's workplace, loitering in the parking lot and glaring through the windows. On one occasion, she even followed Emily to the grocery store, trailing her through the aisles with a smug smirk. When Emily confronted her, Claire just laughed. "What are you going to do? Call the cops? Go ahead. They can't prove anything." But Emily wasn't alone this time. A bystander, noticing the confrontation, discreetly recorded the exchange on their phone. The footage, combined with the video from the flash drive, gave the authorities enough evidence to act. Claire was served with a restraining order later that week. As Claire's actions escalated, Daniel found himself caught in the crossfire. He received a barrage of furious messages from Claire, accusing him of siding with Emily, of being weak, of ruining everything they'd built together. "You brought this on yourself," Daniel finally replied. "Stay away from Emily and the kids. I mean it." Claire's response was chillingly brief. "You'll regret this." For the first time, Daniel truly understood the depth of Claire's instability. He realized he had not only destroyed his family but had entangled himself with someone whose obsession knew no bounds. The climax came one rainy evening when Emily returned home to find her living room window shattered. Panic gripped her as she searched the house, but thankfully, Max and Lily were still at their friend's house. The only sign of the intruder was a single piece of paper left on the coffee table. It read, "This isn't over." Emily called the police immediately, her hands trembling as she recounted the events to the dispatcher. By the time the officers arrived, she was a mess, but her resolve hadn't wavered. This was the final straw. Claire's arrest made headlines the next morning. The evidence against her, harassment, trespassing, and vandalism, was overwhelming. Daniel, though racked with guilt, testified against her in court, acknowledging his role in the chaos but making it clear that Claire had gone too far. As the gavel fell, Claire's fate was sealed. She would face months of legal battles and potential jail time. For Emily, it was a bittersweet victory. The storm had finally passed, but the damage it left behind was undeniable. The storm had finally passed, leaving everyone in its wake to pick up the pieces. Claire's arrest marked a turning point, not just legally, but emotionally for everyone involved. With her removed from the picture, a sense of peace began to settle over Emily's life, though it was a hard-fought victory. The damage Claire had caused, combined with Daniel's betrayal, had left deep scars on the family. Yet, in the quiet weeks that followed, Emily discovered an unexpected strength within herself. She was no longer the woman who silently endured. She had found her voice, her boundaries, and most importantly, her independence. Daniel, too, faced a reckoning. For years, he had blamed external factors, his demanding career, his crumbling marriage, and even Emily's perceived distance for his actions. But as he sat alone in his sparse apartment, far removed from the family home, he began to reflect on the choices that had led him here. During supervised visits with Max and Lily, Daniel worked to rebuild his relationship with his children. It wasn't easy. Max still carried a lot of resentment, and Lily was cautious, unsure whether to trust the man who had hurt them so deeply. But Daniel didn't shy away from their anger. Instead, he met it head-on, apologizing without excuse and allowing his actions to speak louder than words. One evening, as Daniel drove Max and Lily back to Emily's house, Max spoke up for the first time in weeks. "Are you going to mess up again?" he asked, his voice laced with both curiosity and lingering anger. Daniel hesitated, then answered honestly. "I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, Max, but I can promise I'll do everything I can to be better. You and your sister deserve that." Max didn't respond, but the tension in his shoulders eased, if only slightly. It was a small step, but for Daniel it felt monumental. Emily's journey was equally transformative. With Claire gone and the custody battle resolved, she began focusing on herself and her kids in a way she hadn't been able to for years. She enrolled in a small business course at the local community college, determined to turn her catering side hustle into a full-fledged business. Cooking had always been her passion, and now it became her therapy, a way to channel her pain into something constructive. Max and Lily thrived under her care. Their home, once filled with tension and uncertainty, became a place of laughter and warmth again. Emily made it a point to include her children in her healing process, encouraging open conversations about their feelings and reminding them that it was okay to be angry, sad, or confused. One night, as they sat around the dinner table, Lily asked a question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Do you hate Dad?" Emily paused, considering her words carefully. "No, sweetheart, I don't hate him. He made mistakes, and they hurt all of us, but hate won't fix anything. What's important is that we focus on moving forward and making our lives better." Max, ever the skeptic, muttered, "That's a lot easier said than done." Emily smiled. "It is, but we'll get there. Together." Meanwhile, Claire's legal battles dragged on, but Emily kept her distance. The restraining order ensured that Claire could no longer harass her, and for the first time in months, Emily felt like she could breathe. The community rallied around her, offering support and encouragement. Neighbors who had once only exchanged polite greetings now stopped by with meals or simply to check in, reminding Emily that she wasn't alone. As the months turned into a year, the family found their new normal. Daniel continued to work on repairing his relationship with Max and Lily, even as he grappled with the consequences of his actions. He respected Emily's boundaries, understanding that their marriage was over, but still wanting to co-parent effectively. Slowly, they built a tentative truce, civil if not warm. For Emily, life was finally on an upward trajectory. Her catering business, aptly named Fresh Starts, began to take off, thanks to word of mouth and glowing reviews. She found joy in crafting meals that brought people together. It was a far cry from the chaos she'd endured, but it felt right. She'd built this life with her own two hands, and that made every success all the sweeter. The final turning point came on a crisp autumn afternoon. Emily was setting up for a local event when Max approached her, holding a small, weathered envelope. "What's this?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's from Dad," Max said, looking down at the ground. "He wrote me a letter, said he wanted me to read it and think about what he said." Emily studied her son's face, noting the conflict in his expression. "Are you going to read it?" Max nodded slowly. "I think I am. I'm still mad at him, but I want to understand." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's brave of you, Max. Just remember, whatever you decide, it's okay to feel what you feel. There's no right or wrong way to deal with this." He nodded again, tucking the envelope into his pocket. For the first time in a long while, Emily saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. As the sun set on that day, Emily stood back and surveyed her life. It wasn't perfect. There were still challenges to face, still wounds that needed time to heal. But for the first time in years, she felt at peace. This wasn't the life she had imagined when she'd said, "I do," all those years ago, but it was hers. And that made all the difference. And that's the story, folks. If you've stuck with me this far, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world to me, and I can't wait to share more with you next time. See you soon.